Welcome to Education in Focus. I'm your host, Aliana Kernodle. A parental advocacy organization says the Department of Justice spent over $100 million on restorative justice, social emotional learning programs, and diversity, equity, and inclusion programs since 2021. Joining me to dig into this is Chalkboard News editor Brennan Clary. Brennan, tell us about this report.
Yeah, so the report from Parents Defending Education, and they've been outspoken on these kinds of issues in terms of parental advocacy. So they've been just a big proponent of accountability and transparency for a lot of the federal government. And we covered that earlier this year at Chalkboard News as well for the Department of Education. This is specifically for the Department of Justice. So there are the grants that the federal government gets, and then they can disperse that to local entities. And in this case, this grant money is for these STOP grants. That's what they're called. And so there are these different programs to try to crack down on violence and different behavioral issues in schools. And so then this isn't just for school districts, but it does include school districts, but it's also like institutions of higher learning. For example, you can have a university that is developing a program for school districts. And so you would get federal funds to make that happen, right? You're paying for people to create that curriculum, those kinds of things. So that's essentially what they're tracking. And they're looking at the grants that are specifically focused on restorative practices, social emotional learning, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. And they found that essentially that there were 4 different general categories, and that there were 47 grants worth $45 million or so in the general grant. So those were broadly mentioning restorative practices or social emotional learning. For the diversity, equity, and inclusion, that was about 30 grants worth around $32 million. And those are for proposals that discuss diversity, equity, or inclusion, or, quote, explicitly explain how the project is intended to improve outcomes for a specific demographic group. And then there was a third category called consulting or certification, and there was about 22 grants. There's 22 grants there and about $19 million. So most of these are about $1 million per grant. That's usually like a general way to look at it, and sometimes more, sometimes less, but on average, about $1 million per grant. And those include, quote, project proposals that aim to hire consultants to educate students or staff on changing school climate. These consultants, however, often promote divisive concepts such as critical race theory, critical gender theory, and queer theory. And then the fourth category that they have in the report from Parents Defending Education is for hiring. So there's 11 grants for around $10 million, and that includes project proposals, quote, that describe hiring a new administrator, such as a restorative justice facilitator. And for those who aren't aware of restorative justice, it's a sort of alternative to zero tolerance school discipline policies. And as we've written about them before, there is some research that indicates that they're actually more successful in elementary school and high school than they are in middle school, because middle school students don't really like to be told to sit in a circle and talk about their feelings. And that's something that researchers have found. But that is essentially what restorative circles are. There's a lot of focus on kind of the classroom environment as a whole, and really sharing a lot about students' like personal, life experience outside the classroom. And basically, if there's a breaking of trust, then you would have these restorative meetings and conferences with those involved and their families and administrators. And so you would have those administrators would be part of the hiring category there, such as like a restorative justice facilitator, somebody who can sort of mediate those kinds of conflicts. And again, that is like an alternative to these discipline policies. And then that kind of goes hand in hand with, sort of the federal and local push away from some of these discipline practices that lead to outcomes, which a lot of people say are, racially discriminatory, where you have rates of students that are penalized at a different rate than another race or ethnicity, right? So that's one of the concerns that they're raising. And this is sort of a reaction to that. And so those are the 4 main categories of that. And there's, a lot of different specific kinds of things that the money is going toward, but those are sort of the 4 big prongs of that.
So what are some of the examples of these kinds of programs they're funding?
Yeah. So one great example that Parents Defending Education brought up, and one of the helpful things that they do is link to the specific grant proposals that are on the Department of Justice website or on the federal agency websites that are affiliated with the Department of Justice. There's kind of gets complicated pretty quick in terms of the funding stuff, like most things that we talk about here. But one of them, for example, was the Minnesota Department of Education receiving nearly $2 million to create safe learning environments where practices of anti-racism and anti-oppression are embedded. And I think that that's something, if you're a parent and you disagree with some of the premises of, that we live in if you disagree with the premise that we live in a racist society, then that might be a divisive sort of statement to make, right? And sort of this anti-racism, there has, been a lot of legislation in a number of states that are banning terms like that, or that say that they have outlawed teaching that America is a racist country. So I think that is one of those divisive sort of issues that we've seen in recent years, right? With critical race theory and some of the tenets of that. Bowling Green State University in Ohio received $1.8 million, for example, to develop student mental health curriculum in these rural and high poverty districts that included mindful meditation, yoga, and knitting circles, according to Parents Defending Education. So that's another one of those things where you can see in the project proposal that's something that's part of the programming that they offer. And it might not be wrong to offer that. It might be this is a fine program. And it's very good for the community, that it knows better than, another outside organization like Parents Defending Education. But it is something that, federal taxpayers are paying for. So something that they can be aware of, that is going to that. And again, we have the project abstract there, that it does include the second step curriculum, mental health first aid, mindfulness meditation, yoga, and knitting circles. These are all things that are part of that program, and offered to students in those districts, right? So it's just an interesting, question of where is this money going? And some of these specific programs too have stirred controversy. So, for example, the second step one, that some school districts have walked away from that because of concerns about, material that it links to, for example. So I think that there are a lot of different kinds of concerns about where the money is going that you could ask based on what the Parents Defending Education has brought up in the report.
Well, Brendan, thank you for your insights on this story. Listeners can keep up with this story and more at chalkboardnews.com.